Welcome back to Seizing the Years. This is a podcast that we've been running since the beginning of the year, and it's a place for us to treat Healthspan as a journey and not just a destination. My name is Rachael Jennings. I'm the co-founder of Generise, and I run the company together with my dad. And we are a creatine business that focuses on innovation and education. At the time that you're watching this episode, our flagship ingredient will have launched. That's Generise Creatine 1. And I'm really excited to be in the market and actually having something available. It's a really exciting time for us. Anyway, without further ado, today's guest is Sarah Burden, a woman who has spent 2 decades immersed in the natural products industry. And she actually started out physically in the supplement aisle at Whole Foods, which is incredible. And then she's built her career as a sales and education executive across some of the most respected supplement companies in the space. And today she's part of the people science team. So you might know her from LinkedIn. She's quite active, actually. I love to follow her posts. And that's a company that does clinical research, but fundamentally focused on natural and botanical health products. So today we're going to be talking about how that correlates with creatine and Sarah's journey as she's been navigating also this more personal side to her life in terms of metabolic health and perimenopause. So hopefully there's going to be some insights for women of all ages here to learn from Sarah. So Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. And you were just in Barcelona last week for Vita Foods. How would you say that the botanical supplement space is kind of fitting into the supplement landscape in 2026? And what was it like to be on the ground at Vita Foods?
So I'll start first with the show. It was fantastic. It was energizing. All of the meetings were extremely productive. It was, of course, fun to be in Barcelona. And I've got so many friends in the industry at this point that it kind of feels like part vacation, part work trip, right? To get to see so many people that I've known for years and maybe go out for dinner with them at night, or even clients who are close, as close as friends out for dinner. So what a treat, and a really, really productive show. Lots of insights and exciting things to see on the show floor. And botanicals, I think, fit in there. That's a passion for me. In fact, some of those industry colleague friends and I went to the Botanic Gardens in Barcelona after the show was done. So we got even more plant contact once the show wrapped. But the trends are growing for botanical based supplements. And I think as evidence generation tools like clinical research become more and more available to different brands, the trust factor is increasing on botanicals. There are many that have been traditionally used and loved, and folks who are herbalists and all in on herbs have already been taking and loving and benefiting from these kinds of ingredients and products. But I think that they're catching on more and more in the mainstream as we have more tools to generate evidence of their efficacy.
It's fascinating to me. And I know when we had our intro about a month ago, I was asking you about echinacea because I've been taking echinacea for decades. And it's really interesting to understand like the popularity of things like protein and creatine, which are coming originally from animals, derived
Mhm.
from animals largely. And then you're kind of sitting in that other aspect and looking at like vegetation and,
Mhm.
how can leaves and roots and flowers and seeds, I presume, like also play into this health span journey that so many of us are on. What would you say are some of the barriers to evidence for botanicals?
Mhm.
Some of those are maybe a reality and some of them might be a bit myths, actually.
Mhm.
What would you say about that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny for you to contrast with animals because I got to learn from a scientist earlier in my career who had been a biology teacher for high school students before he got into kind of commercial and industry. So he was like Bill Nye the Science Guy. He was so watchable and so easy to learn from. And he said when he was teaching high school biology, the kids really loved learning about animals. And often when it got to plants, they thought, oh, this will be so boring. And he said, no, no, plants are even more fascinating because they have all of the same environmental and evolutionary stressors that animals do, but they're rooted to one spot. So they have to become even more creative with their strategies for reproduction or defense or their immune function because they can't move towards resources or away from predators. They have to do it all within their plant body. And so I think from that perspective, you can start seeing how plants can do all kinds of things, right? If they're growing in an environment that's really low oxygen, they have to be that much more strategic and resourceful with their oxygen utilization. And then that can produce a plant like rhodiola that then athletes can consume to better utilize oxygen during performance, right? So we can benefit from the plants this way. So I think one top myth would be that they're not as interesting or they're not as effective as something that might come from an animal. So let's dispel that myth right away. And another kind of stumbling block for producing more evidence around plants and botanicals is there are different approaches to utilizing plant materials. Do we use a whole plant extract and leave it just as it was in the plant, just extracting it with water or glycerin or alcohol, and then maybe concentrating it or not, or just chopping it and using it as a tea for a pure water extract? Or some companies will take the extract and then isolate or standardize to a particular compound that has evidence behind it. Some folks would say, well, that's you could throw out the baby with the bathwater if you're focused just on the withanolide content of ashwagandha, for example, and you're missing the greater, picture. So when various companies and organizations are running clinical research on plants, they're not all using the same standardization. They're not all using the same plant parts sometimes. So the aggregate for the evidence can be kind of split or mixed. And so this is again where clinical research becoming more affordable means there's going to be more evidence generated. So some of these traditionally loved ingredients can have even more evidence for commercial use.
What I've noticed is that in Western society, we seem to have really disconnected over the last 100 or 200 years, like from our understanding of, plants and their, not even as far as being medicinal, but even just for simple things like stomach ache, that mint can help with that, right? Or I know nettle tea during your period can be incredibly soothing for cramps. And we seem to kind of look to Eastern medicine and we have like an understanding of Ayurveda and things like that. But there's like this, I know like Eastern Europe and Lithuania has such a strong history using botanicals, and there's some amazing modern brands from that part of the world as well. But even just in England, simple things like all of the nettles that grow at this time of the year. I was talking to my mom about it, and she's like, I remember her mom was picking nettles in the
Yeah,
springtime to make tea that's like really good for your body as you're coming out of that winter time, right?
yes,
And so
so nutritive.
it's really interesting. And have you seen a resurgence in like a Western interest in like native botanicals and not like looking to I'm not there's nothing wrong with it, but we seem to kind of
Sure.
romanticize it in a certain way. Generations ago, right in America and right in the UK, we knew how to use the plants that we now call weeds and kind of whack out
That's
of our
right.
yards, but they might have been really, really beneficial. So how has that kind of shifted culturally? And also, what would you say are three of the top botanical supplements that you're keenly watching right now?
I think that's a great question. I do think the exoticization, the romanticization of those kind of Eastern herbs is still very strong for Western consumers. We see a lot of turmeric, ashwagandha, now shatavari, another Ayurvedic herb that's great for women, making an influx. I think that there's still road ahead of us for helping reconnect with the herbs that are native and indigenous to our own countries here in the United States or in the UK, I'm sure. I think that that's still probably a fairly herbalist centric perspective to think about what grows where you are and what can benefit you where you are. But hopefully it's catching on more and more. And as people start to benefit from high quality ingredients from other countries, hopefully that does help open people's minds, consumers' minds to the things that might be here in their own backyard. There's a lot that's trapped in that with sort of like class and culture too. So even with dandelions. So I learned recently one of the reasons that we like to see a weed free yard with no dandelions was because that was a status symbol. If you could maintain a yard with no dandelions in it, it meant you didn't need to use the dandelions as food. And so, sort of a similar thing where there was an anti breastfeeding kind of mentality, right? It meant you were posh enough to have formula and not have to do it yourself, right? But maybe we lost so much nutrition. Similar kind of thing that dandelions are extremely nutritive. All three parts of the plants can benefit us. And so, if you could have a weed free yard, it meant I'm not growing my own food. I'm buying my food at the market. We have enough resources. So, some of these ebbs and flows culturally aren't always great for us nutritionally.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And there's been whole decades where, going to get fast food was a status symbol. And then now, like 40 years later, we were like, oh man, like
Yeah,
that's not an elite place to be eating at all.
exactly.
Yeah. You're talking about dandelions, you're talking about, I mentioned echinacea and things like that. What are the top three that you're really keenly
Oh,
watching right now? Yeah.
thanks for bringing me back around to that.
No,
So I would say shatavari is one that's getting so much buzz now. And that's interesting because it was a hard herb for me to find. Actually, when I was nursing my daughter, it's a galactagogue herb, meaning it can help increase breast milk supply. And it was tough for me to track down in the quantities I needed for the evidence-based approach I was taking, for increasing my breast milk supply. And and now it's got a lot of buzz at the big shows. There, even the sponsored app for the Vita Foods show, the main page when you log in was about a shatavari ingredient. So this one I think is great. There are a lot of benefits for women, for for libido, for hormone balancing. So I think that's one to watch. I think that ashwagandha, there have been some recent pieces of legislation in India that are going to kind of continue to impact the market for ingredient suppliers. And so I think that's going to be something very interesting to watch, maybe for a different reason. People have very strong opinions. I was at the
Yeah.
International Conference for the Science of Botanicals a few weeks ago, and as heated as ethnopharmacognosists get, the Q&A session was pretty heated when it came to ashwagandha root versus leaf. So that's one that I'm keeping my eye on. In terms of as an ingredient that consumers might be interested in checking out, I think rhodiola is one. There are some companies that are getting into an innovative space with the herb rhodiola. That kind of came on the scene with some Olympic athletes back in the 70s who started performing at much greater levels after taking rhodiola. That's one, especially when we're fatigued and we need to keep going, that I think a lot of us can probably relate to in these kind of post-pandemic years when we're having to get back up to speed after having been remote only for so long, or reintegrating back into our normal lives.
That's a really similar story to how creatine started. Olympic athletes showing a performance increase, and then decades later, the consumers start to realize, hey, this has mainstream appeal and application as well. I didn't know that about radiola. So you're at People Science and you were with People Science at Vita Foods, which is so much fun. How do the decentralized clinical trials empower smaller wellness brands to actually
Mhm.
generate credible evidence that they can use to, differentiate themselves on the market, and also to kind of close that gap of clinical level research only being available for big pharma? And how does People Science maybe kind of make that more accessible for, I don't know, like a smaller founder based company or just a more local brand?
Yeah, this was the big appeal to me for wanting to join a decentralized clinical trial organization as an employee. So I had worked, like you said, starting at Whole Foods in the aisle, standing with my apron. I helped Ringo Starr one time. That was the biggest celebrity I ever helped. I helped him B vitamins. That was a lot of fun in Chicago. But I worked for a number of supplement brands, like you said, great, well reputed supplement brands who used the highest quality ingredients. And one of those brands actually invested on their own in human clinical trials, which was pretty unheard of back in 2015, 2016. And the price tag on those trials was $1.5 million per trial. And so huge, expenditure, years of work. I got to work closely with our chief science officer, who was such an amazing and dynamic woman, and seeing what she had to go through to get all of the parts of the clinical trial to come through, partnering with the university, the length of time it took, the back and forth that it took. It was just registering with me that this is a big sink of time and money. And with pharmaceutical trials, of course, their price tag is $10 million dollars for a human clinical trial to bring a drug to market. So this is obviously well outside the means of most CPG supplement brands. And so when I found out that, People Science, the pioneers of decentralized clinical trials, our co-founders, Dr. Noah Kraft and Dr. Belinda Tan, originally created the first platform for decentralized, meaning not all in one clinic, remote connected clinical trials. They first created a business for pharma, and got their expertise there, proved that it was a viable platform for establishing this evidence, worked with Big Pharma. They wanted to turn their attention to wellness products instead of disease care, more wellness and preventative type care from nutraceuticals, from, even meditation apps or different kinds of plant medicine. And I saw that this was such an opportunity to bring it into the hands of more companies so we can reduce the cost by, it's a tenth the cost that it would be in a brick and mortar location. You don't need as many staff members to manage the trial when you do things in a more decentralized way. It also opens up the participant pool. So when you have a brick and mortar location that human participants need to come into to sign their consent form, to come back and bring their weekly or biweekly journal of what they've eaten and what their symptoms were like, you need someone who can take time off of work. So it's only a certain kind of job that you can take that much time away from. You may have to pay for parking. You may have to deal with, are you the primary caregiver for children at home? Which meant that most clinical trials, even the dietary supplement space, were primarily on white men over 40. And so I saw that this was also a tool for bringing more genuine diversity and, a bigger population to these trials. So we can get women, we can get people in rural areas, we can get people of different socioeconomic backgrounds to get a better, clearer snapshot of how a supplement works in the real consumer pool, not just people in these urban centers who have the means and the access to a clinic. So that was very exciting to me. So it's kind of the democratization of clinical evidence in a number of ways, not only the cost for a company, but in who has access to participate in the trial as well.
There's so many similarities between that and where we are with creatine today. So much of the research for creatine for the last 25 years was in healthy people doing active things,
Mhm.
and it was constantly validating the same point. And then it's in the last 5 years that the research community has become so much more open minded and interested in pushing out those boundaries and looking at all different ages and people that are, going through something medically, and how does creatine perform to
Mhm.
support in those use cases as well. And so it's really exciting. And then also that encourages more people to, start a company to fill a specific need of a certain target customer. And
Mhm.
it's really awesome that People Science can then actually provide that clinical rigor, to somebody who's maybe just putting their life savings into a new supplement idea, and they're doing it with their wife or their spouse or something like
Mhm.
that. So,
Mhm.
and a lot of great brands start that way because their purpose is so meaningful.
Absolutely passion driven. Well, and not only for a new company, but also one thing I love to see is clients coming to me who have existing brands, legacy ingredients that maybe have 30 years of clinical research, but it's been so pigeonholed, like you said. And they'd like to do a decentralized trial to start expanding and say, we've always looked at this ingredient for this use case. What does it do for perimenopausal women? What does it do for young athletes? Right. And so expanding that area of research so that we can start being more inclusive with the way that we're using these ingredients.
Do you see also that the consumer that buys botanical supplements is also kind of demanding that from the bottom up, to have more transparency and more clinical research, like as claims on the things that they're buying? Is that part of the reason also why there's a more movement towards this?
Every division of consumers, it's shown when NBJ shares their stats or when Spins shares their stats, clinical evidence is rated very, very highly by consumers across, multivitamins, sports nutrition, botanicals, herbs, you name it. They want more evidence. And I think in a time when there's more uncertainty, we have a lot of loud voices and maybe a lot of voices on social media, and you don't know their credibility. So people want to see evidence. And so I think anytime we can provide more clinical evidence and research that holds up to scrutiny and peer review, people feel more confident about voting with their dollars for a given supplement or ingredient.
Especially if you're talking about some botanicals being really beneficial for women during incredibly important times in our lives, and you can believe your grandma and it worked for her, and that sounds great. But
Sure.
I think also these days we are looking for more substantiation, especially if you're then pregnant or you're passing that through your breast milk into a little baby. Like, we are very aware of, just how things impact a child. And I don't have kids yet, but I think I would also definitely be, just very aware at this at in this age that we're living. So you grew up kind of in the 80s and the 90s, and I was born in 92, so you've got a different generational perspective than I do, and I'm so curious to ask you a little bit more about the kind of reality of that time period. And for me, that's like, okay, Kate Moss and like that, what did she say? Like nothing tastes as good as being skinny
Right,
feels
right,
and this
right.
kind of thing. Let's kind of switch a little bit and talk about your personal sort of health span journey, like from those Whole Foods days and, growing up in those decades. And how have you been able to shift from this kind of aesthetic focused
Mhm.
sense of importance to maybe being more intentional about your metabolic health, things like resistance and like muscle mass and things like that? Give me the full story.
Yeah, no, it's so true, and sometimes I forget until I consume a piece of media from those days. Like, I recently rewatched there was the Gwyneth Paltrow and Ethan Hawke Great Expectations adaptation from the '90s, and it was sort of the peak of heroin chic, and Gwyneth is skeletal in that movie, and I it was such a shock to see it, but this was the media that we were all consuming, and absolutely, I was swept up in all that. I had photos of Kate Moss torn out of magazines taped up to my wall, and it was absolutely the mindset of skinny by any means necessary, right? And under eating and just wanting to be skinny. And there was no mass media emphasis for women to be strong. And I think even strong women maybe were not held up as a positive standard, right? It was all about as lean and skeletal as possible in all the media, all the tabloid magazines, everything like that. Obviously, so much toxicity with comparing people's bodies and like, oh, look how big so and so has gotten, and unflattering paparazzi photos at the beach. The worst thing that could happen is you'd have a postpartum belly, right? It just very toxic all the way across. But I didn't realize how much of that I was still kind of holding on to until my hormones started to really shift as I got into my 40s and started to experience the perimenopause hormonal change. And I saw how I was going to either need to keep reducing the amount of food I ate each day to the point where I was going to be hungry all the time, which was uncomfortable. And I'm not showing up as my best self at work or for my family if I'm irritable and edgy and hungry. And I was working with a great scientist, Dr. Sue Hewlings, and she talked about how, yeah, I hope you get to have her on your show, that your muscles are a hormone of metabolism. And she wasn't preachy and she didn't push. She would just drop knowledge on me every once in a while. And it really made a difference in the way I started thinking about things. So I'm filing away this information, sort of like I did when I worked for the supplement brands and saw, oh, look at all these problems with site based human clinical research. I'm starting to make a little file of, okay, muscles are an organ of metabolism. My metabolism is changing. The way that I've eaten since I was 25, which was working, has suddenly stopped working. I'm going to have to make some new changes. I also read a book by Miranda July, the performance artist. I don't know if you know her, but she is very artsy and very creative. And in her book, which is called like the Perimenopause Manifesto novel, she starts working out with weights. And I thought, well, if she can do it, and she's very outre, right, with her fashion and her art, if she can go to the gym, I can go to the gym. And I never thought I could be a person who would show up and lift weights and do resistance training, have a gym routine. I was an art school kid. The jocks used to come yell at us in the art room, right? So it was very like the Breakfast Club. Like I didn't see how this could ever sync up. The identity I had of myself is more artistic and theatrical. And when I started going, also with encouragement from our mutual friend Dave Slagle, who has been an advocate for fitness, especially for women, for decades. Again, just kind of gentle support and encouragement. I started going and I couldn't believe the difference it made. So I've got, my wearable, what happened to my quality of sleep, what happened to my stress level, even separate from what happened to my metabolism. I couldn't ignore. I was my own N of one study, but everything improved. My ability to focus while I was sitting at my laptop at work, my mood with my family, just the oxygen flow to my brain. And having lived through that skinny by any means necessary, even when I had gotten down to unhealthy weights, in the 90s, I never felt happy about my body. And through doing resistance training and having a 3 times a week cadence of going to the gym, I feel satisfaction with my body the most I've ever had for the first time in my life, really feeling satisfied. And so it's been seriously transformative to get into this habit.
I've had the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Susan Kleiner a few times. And then she also approached us in a restaurant in Barcelona last week, Tuesday. And I was like, you're not supposed to be seeing me right now. But she has really been an advocate for women being strong, not skinny, for decades. And she was way ahead of her time from what I understand. And it must have been really quite cultural for her to be publishing her first books, like in the decades where it was kind of skinny by all means, as you say. And it's really interesting to see this cultural shift and also, having more of a sense of like feeling strong, also enabling us to do other things well, like you said, performance at work or, relationships, and how holistically having muscle mass seems to positively impact our lives as women. And it's fascinating and it's really inspiring, I think, for me, also just to understand, even as I prepare my body to carry a child and then go through pregnancy, it's like that's something that I should kind of be training for, and I do
Yeah.
train for. And then if you view perimenopause and the years after that in the same way, it's a very, very different mentality than trying to fit into like a little black dress or something. You know what I mean? And that
Right.
shift is huge. Yeah.
Agree. I agree. Yeah. A more noble goal, sure, but we're all driven by vanity, I think, or many
Yeah.
of us are driven by vanity. And it's a yes and situation, right? I get to feel good about the way my body looks and also the way I'm feeling, which I realize now the look was the tip of the iceberg. I'm getting all of these benefits for my mental focus, my mood stability, everything from devoting this time.
What does your week look like at the moment then while you're busy with work and you've got a family? How do you fit that in? Are you going to the gym or are you working out at home?
So I have figured out for me, and I think this is such a personal thing that everyone needs to figure out if they're trying to get into a habit or routine. Some people do really well when they don't have to leave the house and they can work out at home. I have found out I'm a person who does need to leave the house, but I don't want to get in my car. So lucky for me, there is a community rec center that is a 12-minute walk from my house. So even when it's snowing, I'll take accountability photos for the people who encouraged me to start an exercise routine, me walking with snow in my bangs, on the way to the gym in the wintertime. But it's a 12-minute walk, and then I can spend my 35, 45 minutes there and do my 12-minute walk back. So I do that 3 times a week in the morning. I'm a morning person. Some people love doing it after work as a way to decompress before they go back home. For me, the morning is my optimal time. And then I can come home and shower and feel really fresh and invigorated and ready for the day. And all that blood flow, I really benefit in my workday from doing it then. So, but I also am a big reader. I love to read, and I did not want to give up my reading time. So I just get up quite early so that I can have a little bit of, quiet reading time in the morning before getting dressed and heading over to the gym. And now my husband has started joining me to go to the gym in the morning. And I didn't have to nag or push. That would not have worked. But I think he saw the benefits I was getting. And eventually he was like, "Can I come with you?"
Look, as women, I think also sometimes even something like going to the gym feels selfish because we could be doing something in the meantime that's like cleaning somebody else's room or folding somebody's underpants or
Yes,
something,
yes.
and it takes a bit of a shift also to be like, I need to do things that help me be strong and healthy. Because if I'm not, I actually can't feed into other people and help serve them. And I'm not going to be able to do that if I've got osteoporosis either,
Right.
you know? Yeah, it's a thing, and you really need to kind of arrive there and then keep yourself there. Because there's a lot of things that are trying to like, break it all back down and get you to just stop again and don't not keep going. So it's nice that you found something that works for you. And so this has obviously all been part of your kind of transition into perimenopause and like a really pivotal time in most women's lives. And so that protocol includes creatine. I was
That's
very
right.
excited to find out about. So how has that maybe changed the way that you personally approach like longevity and supplementation? And so you've got your botanicals, but then you've got creatine, which is, synthetic and chemically synthesized, and what have you. So give me a bit of a look into your mindset around that. And how do those two things find balance in your life?
Oh, I think that's a great question. So creatine is definitely, firmly in the sports nutrition camp. And for somebody who, the way I saw myself as this more artsy bohemian, herb loving, maybe I want to wander through a field of plants and, see myself very differently from somebody who's the typical sports nutrition consumer. I realize now that, I was keeping myself from taking advantage of really beneficial ingredients for myself. And so that felt like, oh, wow, I really have changed if I'm going to be not only going to the gym, but also taking creatine. Like, who am I? But it's a yes and kind of approach. And there is so much evidence for women in perimenopause and beyond with creatine. And starting to take it, I got it recommended by a friend who's a naturopathic doctor and saw the benefit, of course, to the time I was spending in the gym. And that was great to have more payoff for the effort and the sweat that you're putting in. But then I really started to see cognitive benefits where the symptoms I was having so far in my perimenopause journey, I had not experienced anything like a hot flash or night sweat or even sleep troubles. But the brain fog was real. And there would be times where I'd be looking at my laptop and thinking, like, what is this customer trying to tell me? And I'd have to read the email 3 times. And that was scary, right? It's scary for someone who's a knowledge worker and my expertise is why I'm employed. So that was terrifying. Getting up to the 10 gram a day serving for creatine really made a difference for me in cognition and brain fog. And so, yeah, I love that I can keep the door open on some of these ingredients that maybe weren't the ones that had the sort of aesthetic I was drawn to or the kind of folk history that I was like. I love old herb books. The older the better and the weirder and witchier the better. I love that. And also I do want evidence. And so I couldn't ignore the evidence that was being presented to me about creatine for women's health.
It's interesting how we sometimes sort of push things away from us because they don't seem to fit into our own like characterized
Yes.
personas of ourselves. Creatine is going through this metamorphosis right now where people of all different lives and walks of life and are starting to understand this is not exclusive to, guys in the gym that are trying to lift heavier to be pumped for summer,
Mhm.
and the origins of creatine and understanding that it's in the cells of our bodies from conception. If you have a creatine deficiency in a child, that is really detrimental to their
Mhm.
development. And last year, I had a lot of really big aha moments, understanding that creatine is pivotal for all
Mhm.
people and it's not just owned by a certain marketing narrative. And it's so much fun now to see creatine sort of really just be able to breathe life into, you know, health for people across the board. I love
Mhm.
it. And sometimes I guess that's the case with botanicals, maybe as well, that you can't reach. Maybe fitness guys are pushing that away because they don't think that there's a connection for them because they're not, you know, wearing overalls in the yard digging
Yeah.
up. How do you navigate that? Because in some respects, you're kind of trying to maybe do the reverse cross pollination, pun intended, like of what we're doing with creatine. So how is that going to work? It's not in our question list, but I'm interested.
Yeah.
Like, what's the marketing plan for helping a broader audience understand how botanicals can benefit them?
Well, marketing is everything, right? I just was at my dermatologist yesterday and I saw that the little sample packets they had, when you're checking out and setting up your next appointment, I think it was Neutrogena had collagen banking sunblock. And I was like, they are following the TikTok trends. They are tapped into the hashtag of the moment, right? Collagen banking. And I think it was just sunblock, but helping, preserve your collagen by not having it be degraded by the sun. I think marketing is always going to factor in. And what I've seen for CPG supplement brands who do incorporate botanicals in products catering towards that kind of sports nutrition, gym bro kind of guy, absolutely, there are ingredients that get used. Horny goat weed is one. Long Jack is another, but a lot of times they have branded names that are sort of aggressive sounding, like LJ1000, right? And so then this sounds like something that could be in a stack of something in a black plastic container with, extreme whatever. I can remember the first time I went into a sports nutrition store as a sales rep, having worked at Whole Foods and then becoming a sales rep, calling on other health food stores. Most of the stores I was going into had wooden shelves, an owner more like in Birkenstocks and an overall, maybe a hemp necklace, right? That was the majority of the health food stores I was going into. But one of the accounts on my list was purely a sports nutrition store. It was the first time I saw the self tanner with the sponge applicator and the glue for the edge of the bikini to not let it roll up during the fitness competitions. And I was like, whoa, and the skull and crossbones on everything because the branding was all very extreme. But so there are botanicals being used in some of those products, but they do still have that kind of branding. So some people may be consuming plants right now who don't even realize that they're consuming plants.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Sneaking those functional ingredients into products
Hmm.
that people are buying on face value, maybe just for the aesthetic or the benefit. There's a lot
Hmm.
to be said for that. So, Sarah, what does Seizing the Years, the title of this show, I've been running it for 2 years as a blog, and now it's with episodes. But what does Seizing the Years mean to you now, like at this point in your life, both professionally and personally? When I just say that, what comes to mind, and what does it mean for you?
Yeah, I think for me, the way that I feel like I'm seizing the years right now is these consistent daily actions that I have evidence now make such a difference in my life. And I've got these objective ways to measure what's happening in my body and see the benefit. It can be so easy to forget, right? That's so many people I think have experience of looking back in a journal and saying, "Oh wow, I felt really differently back then when I was doing these things to take care of myself." It's so easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day busyness and tasks, and like you said, there's always so much demanding our attention. But a few different ways that I'm sort of measuring, the benefits that I see, it becomes undeniable. And so going to the gym consistently, for me, also taking that quiet reading time in the morning really helps center me for the day, not jumping on and looking at news online first, but picking up a book.
Why you don't want to read the news, Isaiah?
Like, I
Yeah.
wanna stay tuned in, but when I open my phone first thing and look at that, it's like I'm, splitting the path that I could have taken for the day, and I'm starting out with anxiety and elevated stress levels versus starting out something slow, having my cup of tea, sitting and reading for just even 30 minutes, going to the gym, and having that start to the day. And I've got this evidence that these kinds of daily habits, my supplement routine, I also do a big wash and chop of veggies on Sundays, and I have glass containers. And so I make a whole rainbow of veggies for the fridge for every day. And so I can take it out before lunchtime and let it start coming up to a little bit room temperature, and I can nibble my veggies. So I have a pound of veggies every day. And all of these little daily habits make such a big difference. And so then I get to feel my best every day and show up for my job, for my family, and have what feels like abundance from small daily habits. I don't have to destroy myself. I don't have to spend 6 hours in the gym sweating and toiling, but even just the small investment I'm making, I'm reaping so many benefits from. And so I know the more muscle I build now, the better I hold on to my bone mass, the more physically capable I'll be of continuing to go on long walks when we go as a family and travel in Europe together, right? I want to be able to have life in my years, longevity and health span, and not just skinny.
Yeah, it's not that empowering to be so skinny that like everything is exhausting and you're just miserable, and saying no to cake at your best friend's birthday, like that's just,
Mhm.
you're not enjoying your life if you're living through that lens, right? So I'd love to interview you again in like 20 years and see like, Sarah in that next big
I love it.
stage. So
I
I'll
love
give
it.
you I'll send you a DM in 20
That's
years and
right.
we'll. For anybody listening who's been intrigued by your information about botanicals in today's episode, what would you say is like a good entry point? How could somebody even start to figure out, are there botanicals that I should be supplementing with, or that could address some of my like personal, yeah, I don't know, just things that you might be going through right now? What's a good entry point for learning about it and choosing what might work for someone?
Oh gosh, well, there are so many resources, it can be overwhelming. If you live in an area with a good independent health food store that's been there, that has wooden shelves, I'd say that's a great entry point, right? With people on the staff who've been there for years and years, they can kind of help you get started with something simple and nutritive that might be a good fit for you. There's an herbalist, Rosemary Gladstar, who's written a number of books, and Many of those are very approachable for newcomers. I think there are a number of different websites by herbalists that kind of give great history and ways in. But I would say, yeah, if you have a good local independent health food store, that's a great way.
In real life. Yeah, in
Yes.
real get in front of somebody who's really passionate about it and let them sort of tell you what to start with, which is really, really nice actually. Fantastic. It's been such a rich conversation and I've learned a lot and I'm intrigued to expand from just echinacea, maybe some other I drink nettle tea and I've got my mint tea as well. Those are my kind of three things on stock in the house at all times. And then also my husband has like mint capsules that he'll take if he has like crazy indigestion or something. We keep those in my purse sometimes when we go out. So they're amazing. It's been a pleasure to interview you, and I'll make sure that both your LinkedIn and also the website for People Science are in the description for anybody that is interested in following you or checking out what People Science might be able to offer their company or their startup. So that's fantastic. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Such a treat to get to speak with you and get to know you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.